I think we're ready to start the afternoon session, so let me turn it over to Filippo.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all, and thank you for having invited me to this very, very good meeting, because I think as we go to 6-person crew, and in my quality of flight surgeon, we see that in order to maintain the health of our crew members, we need to get enough knowledge on the countermeasures. And I've been working on countermeasures several years ago, and I have been following this up with as my mission support experience goes on, that I think, and since this morning, a lot of information was shared on the countermeasures already, and a lot of topics that we'll be discussing later in this panel have been already touched upon this morning. I think we are on the right way ahead on this. What I would like to announce, on the list that you have, there are 2 additional panel members that joined us. One is Paul Christopher Levitsov from the Russian Academy of Science, and Dr. Olga Shimbrieva from the Trotsky Center for Microsurgery, and they are sitting in front on the first row. As a flight surgeon, we've been several times confronted with our crew members asking us what I need to do in flight in order to maintain my health. And we tell them, of course, the major issues that we have when you fly in space, what we're looking at is, as we said also this morning, is bone loss, is radiation exposure, is loss of aerobic capacity. However, ours is a limited experience. As ESA, I belong to the European Space Agency, and so I'm leaving this now to Dr. Morgun to provide us an insight on what are, from his perspective, the most critical medical limits that so far are not allowing us to leave Earth's orbit. And Dr. Morgun, the floor is yours.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Значит, я хочу начать с того, что
I would like to start
приоритетным
with the following.
направлением нашей работы является
The priority
охрана здоровья космонавтов.
in our activity is
И это наша самая главная задача,
health provision for our astronauts and cosmonauts. And it is our task to prepare a cosmonaut, to train him or her well, so that everything will be okay, and we need to monitor their health, and also we need to land the crew, and also provide for rehab. In ISS program, we have formed 2 groups, 2 committees on medical operations and space medicine that cover all these aspects. As to perspectives and future flights, I believe this will be just a continuation of the activity that we have had so far, that we are still doing. That's why, first of all, I would like
что мы будем использовать дальнее космическое пространство для полетов человека.
Believe in the fact that we are going to continue exploring space, and we still need to develop and start developing new medical standards. This is a very clear task, and the second task is the activities that have to do with psychology and psychological training. And the third task that I foresee here as of now is the support and monitoring of health of crew members.
Профилактика состояния здоровья.
Also countermeasures.
Сегодня этот уже вскользь вопрос затрагивался.
And we have already touched upon this. We were talking about medicine as treatment, if necessary, because the probability of the fact that a person may be traumatized or get ill is still there, and we need to make sure that we have the capability to have medical support here. The fourth item is rehab. After completion of a space flight. In order to fulfill what I have highlighted here, we need to continue the work that we are doing now. We have been doing that for 10 years in ISS program, and prior to that we've been doing the same on Shuttle Mir program and the Mir station. This experience should be used in planning of all the activities that have to do with maintenance of health in space. And we have a lot of hope for the medical research that is new, that we have started at IMBP, Institute of Medical and Biological Projects. And we're going to have a new experience, which is Mars 500. These scientific experiences will probably provide us with some great data in order to use this for development of new standards and for the medical support as well as treatment on board, to make sure that the crew members will be launched healthy and will return healthy. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Morgun. I would like to expand on this by, as we saw this morning, we need research in order to look into the issues that have been brought up. And of course, as we say, if we have good countermeasures on board, we do also have a better path for rehabilitation, or possibly no need for rehabilitation when someone comes back to Earth. But to do all this, we need research. And research also, as we said this morning, we touched on this, brings up ethical problems. We have n equal 1 and n equal 5. And so I would like to ask to Dr. Daman, he's actively involved in the ESA Medical Board. How does medical operation and science actively interface, trying to make this next step possible, also, although maintaining and respecting the individual fundamental right to privacy?
Yeah, thank you, Filippo. Yeah, I think it's a fine line we have to walk there between maintaining the confidentiality and privacy of medical data on one side, and also enabling science to provide us as caring physicians with more information, more background knowledge that we can execute and do our job better. However, I think mankind has established a certain high-level legal constructions like the confidentiality of medical data, the privacy of medical data. I think in all of our international agencies and member states, the medical confidentiality is one of the highest goods that we have. And I think we have to be careful that we are not undermining what, for good reasons, we have established. We have to rely on a very good patient, let's say, healthy patient-flight surgeon relationship. Otherwise, we are also not able to progress. We need to establish that personal relationship to the astronauts on one side. On the other side, we have to enable and have to move forward with our scientific research. I think what has happened in the recent past with the ISS program is that certain boards have been established, like the Multilateral Space Medicine Board, that is more or less dealing with the certification of astronauts, that is dealing with identifying risks and defining risk mitigation strategies, and also more and more getting into the normal process of identifying what is the spaceflight normal, what are the medical challenges that we are faced with, what questions do we have to raise and ask our scientific community to help us progressing in space medicine. So I think boards like that, like the MSMB, are already a good platform where we can openly discuss medical issues by still maintaining the confidentiality of data, and as an output we may then address the questions to our science community and say, okay, those are the needs that we have identified in medical operations, the needs that you scientists have to help us with to answer. Another interesting aspect is, and that became very obvious last week in Los Angeles during the Aerospace Medical Association meeting, is how the commercial spaceflight companies, or however you want to call it, how they deal with it. I think the approach that is currently performed, that all of the spaceflight participants, or maybe astronauts, however you call them, who are now flying on those flights, they have more or less agreed on making their medical stories, their medical findings, sometimes the medical hiccups they go through to finally get on board of Soyuz and go to ISS, to make it public, to discuss it on congresses in medical communities. And I think that is an extremely helpful approach, and very quickly I hope we are no longer talking of an n equals 1 or n equals 5. I hope that the price per ticket goes down and we will have more people who share then also their experiences and also their medical data. I agree that is, I think, not the approach we should take for professional spaceflight. I think there is a career, it's a job. We are the representatives of the medical interests of the astronauts, so we cannot just make it a requirement, more or less, that the medical data of our astronauts is published. But I think we have to really look more into how we enable that, how we build it into life science research activities. And I think many of the spaceflight agencies have already prepared their data sharing agreements, addressing the science community and defining our needs, but also looking into the results that have been obtained in science and bridging the gap between life science and medical operations. So there is no easy answer, Filippo, to how we deal with it in the future. We have to progress in science research, but again, I'm a pretty tough defender in privacy and medical privacy of the data of the astronauts that they release to us as their family physicians, their doctors, etc. It will be a process over time, but I'm open for any good ideas that may come up.
Thank you, Volker. And I'd like to structure this somewhat similar to what we have done this morning. And if the audience would like also to ask some questions to these first two panelists, we'll move to a slightly different topic. Feel free to do so. And well, then we can pick this up at the end. And the next step is, the topic of the discussion here is countermeasures. However, as we've seen this morning, a lot has already been done in countermeasures. We're flying for the last 50 years. And I would like to ask Dr. Kozlowskaja, who has so much experience over this and has been instrumental to tutor us through it in the last years as we came online. How much of the experience we had in the past years, how much of the experience we have now on ISS will be to our advantage? How can we use it for the next missions ahead of us?
Thank you. I think that the history or experience of long-term flights showed us already that we know the main countermeasure which can be and should be used during long-term flight to maintain the health of cosmonaut, astronaut, and I would like to cite here Dr. Polyakov when he came from the second flight of 14 months. That the first words which he told us, who was chairing his countermeasure, he said, "See, now we know for sure that we can fly already to Mars." Because, and he showed me, his muscles and his shoulders and so on. And that was joke, and I'm joking now, but nevertheless it is true, because the analysis of data which we had from long-term flight, and I'm quite sure when we talk, we have not to forget that actually long-term flights, space flights, it is the most long-term and the most multi-personal experiment which is going on countermeasure. Why I'm saying so? Because actually, yes, we have some protocols. We give our cosmonaut protocols. We explain to them what they have to do, but none of them fulfill our protocols. None of them, believe me, just one. I know of all. They do perform. They do maintain the rules. They know how to take care about themselves. But all of them, they're not rabbits. They have their own understanding what is good and what is bad for them. And therefore, they change immediately that protocol in this or in the other direction. And that's great. Because I tell them always that that's great, because nobody would allow me to give you direction not to change protocol during flight. But you do it, so we are doing experiment together with you. But the only thing which we make this experiment successful, you should give us a precise report what you are doing and how you are doing. And we have to have very good battery of tests to test what are the results. And then, if we test you before flight, during flight, and after flight, and that is my part. And your part is to describe precisely what you were doing. How did you feel? What were subjective results? And so on and so on. Then, at the end, we will have great results of good studies. And that actually, maybe not in such an ideal way, but we were doing for many years. And it gave us information, not just what I told about Dr. Polyakov, but it gave us information, like we analyzed the results of flight, long-term flight. And not so few of them. Somebody told today, we have so few persons. Not so few. It is already on space station. We have more than 20. On Mir station, we had more than 40. So take a look. Only in of this mission, we already have more than 60 people who were using different protocols, different emphasis, and so on. And if we have the battery of 60 people, that's not bad. And this analysis of these 60 people showed that the results of flight in relation to their health don't depend on duration of flight. That's for sure. It depends solely on what they were doing in flight. There were no things which we could attribute to individual tolerance or non-tolerance, not at all. Because we had many cosmonauts, astronauts, who were flying not once, but 2 times, 3 times, and every time they tried something else. And when they came back, they could be put in one group because we put them in groups. They could be put in one group or in the other, depending on what they were doing in space. So, but it seems that, in a way, Polyakov is right. Okay, we know how to save our cosmonaut, but the more we know, the more questions we have. That is old truth. Actually, today on the station, we have integrated medical service about which our predecessors talked here. That's great. But I don't know if anybody in auditorium, besides those people who are flying, knows that we don't have integrated countermeasure system on board. If the countermeasure is part of medical support, then not of your medical support system is integrated. We have the Russian system and the American system. And they're different. They have different emphasis. They have different key exercises, different principles on which they stay. I'm sure that there is truth in one and in the other. And it seems that, first of all, because we have to optimize our system, the best thing is to compare and to make the conclusion. What is good, what is not so good, what is bad, and so on and so on. But we cannot do it. Why? That's what I wanted to talk, and I wanted to emphasize during this meeting. Both countermeasure systems are based on science, that's for sure. On science, on scientific data which are obtained during flight or during on-ground experiment, during on animal experiment and so on one side, what microgravity is doing to the living organism. And the other science, it is sport physiology, clinical physiology, and so on. So both systems are based on the science. So to go forward, to decide what is good and bad, and what is best, maybe new approaches like we develop in our country. I have no time, and therefore I would not talk about this. And especially because I think that specific questions should be discussed among specialists, especially, on this question or on that question and so on. Here we have to discuss the strategy, the approaches to solving our problem, and maybe define the problem, big problems. And so we have to develop scientific approach further. And the very first and very simple one, it is integrate our science on the board. Integrate it. And it is not difficult, but it seems not difficult. But for 4 years, Dr. Davis is here. More than 4 years, yeah. Jeffrey, it was 4 years ago, right? When we started to try to create the system of joint evaluation of the results of flight. It means evaluate the state of cosmonaut after flight, not just clinically. Thanks for you that you know that they are healthy. That's good, but it is not enough. To develop further countermeasure, it is not enough. We know to know your physical state, muscle state of motor control system, of sensory system, cardiac, and so on and so on. And it seems so simple to create the joint battery. For 4 years, we tried hard. No results up to today. We don't have, we even called this system of evaluation, joint system of cosmonaut state evaluation. We have this document, and that's it. Without it, we will not move. Because we cannot. Americans have their system, and they test their astronaut on one test, a battery test. We have the other system, and the other battery test system. So we keep saying our system is better. Americans say, no, our system is better. That's it. But the system is different. We could have these results because our system based on treadmill, on aerobic, anaerobic, almost 80% we dedicate to treadmill. American on resistive exercise. What is good? So I think that we have to have integrated system of research. And today it occurred to me that medical people, and we are also medical people, but medical people who are responsible for cosmonaut health created the medical board, which is called International Medical Operational Panel. They are working, I would say, excellent. They talk every Thursday. They discuss every question of the medical support. They meet twice a year, discuss the strategic points, and so on and so on. They develop the documentation on this, on that, on this. We have to create international scientific board. And this board also should discuss and select the priority questions, because questions are so many, we can investigate everything at the very same time. But to make some priorities, it is not good to make priorities here, in spite of cosmonaut here, and all this. There should be this scientific board, which is the same as medical board, consists of specialists, and this board should select the priorities, select the approaches, maybe decide in between who with whom should do this experiment, and so on and so on. So I think that it is absolutely necessary. Without it, we still will have maybe some brilliant experiment on board. But this brilliant experiment, without being linked to all the other things, will not give us understanding what's really going on there. That's my question, and that's my suggestion, and I think it is extremely important thing.
And thank you, Ines.
Thank you.
I think that was really the best introduction to the panel, and I can go to Dr. Murakov, because he's an astronaut, cosmonaut. He's a scientist and a physician. So I think he can also give us an insight from someone who has flown, someone who has been looking at this from a scientific as well as a medical perspective. What he thinks, in his experience as a flown crew, what he thinks it would be best to do for improving countermeasures.
Ну, во-первых, я хочу поддержать Инессу Бенедиктовну.
First off, I would like to second what Ines has been saying here. This is a weak point because we don't have integrated countermeasures on board the station, and we don't have an integrated system, which we must admit and acknowledge. And it will be difficult to implement the suggestion that was being made, because there is an internal system for selecting experiments in the US, in Europe, and we also in Russia have our own system to select experiments. And you know how complex that system is. And this system is not going to be easy to reform. It's probably more difficult to reform it than create something from scratch. But I am thinking that it is within our capability, and we need to work together between doctors and lead investigators to create a standardized battery of tests and investigations that would reflect the primary changes in a human body post-flight and would help evaluate the functional resources or reserves that a cosmonaut has after returning from flight. And if we talk about planetary flights, getting back to what Dr. Morgan said, there is going to be no rehabilitation post-long-duration flight. Instead, there is going to be a lot of work under unusual conditions once the long-duration flight is over, and people should be ready for that. That's a new level of requirement against the countermeasure system, and we are optimistic because of what we've seen in our long-duration flights. We have Dr. Polikov, we have Sergei Avdeyev, we have Vladimir Titov and Musa Manarov, and we have a whole group of people that stayed up there more than 6 months. I'm talking Russian crew members, and there are probably 8 more people in addition to the ones I named. And there is an interesting trend. The longer a person stays on board, the better shape he comes back in. It is paradoxical to a degree. However, or an apparent paradox, but this is a confirmation that we have a good countermeasure system, and if a person knows that he or she can expect an extra long flight, he or she does his or her best to follow recommendations and to complete physical exercise to the extent recommended. And the result is obvious. We discussed loss of bone tissue. It turns out that Polikov lost as much mineral density in his second flight as he lost in his shorter first flight. This is a sort of an experiment within an experiment, which demonstrated that if a person does his best, the system that we have is effective. It needs to be improved, there is no doubt about that. It needs to be customized to the individual, because we have different people with different capabilities, and their previous life is important as well, has an effect. However, the existing system is a basis for planetary countermeasures. However, interplanetary flight has a certain degree of uniqueness. This is a different level and different range of spectrum of radiation, and we need to target that spectrum and study the systems, which we're doing on the International Space Station. We need to study the systems which are the most prone to the effects of this factor. This factor is going to be very important on planetary surfaces, the Moon, Mars, because Mars is practically devoid of a magnetic field. Therefore, the issue of prevention in this regard, both engineering measures and medications, is of paramount importance for people to be able to go outside of low Earth orbits, and for people to be able to go to other planets over long periods of time. You also have to keep in mind another factor, which I will probably be talking about in my presentation in more detail, about the psychological effects of long-duration flight. This is a whole host of factors that have to be approached with an open mind, because an interplanetary vehicle is going to have different objectives than what we have on stations. There needs to be a system of psychological countermeasures. And within the Mars 500 project, we will hold a unique investigation on primates studying radiation effects. And there will be a number of experiments in parallel where we're looking at the effects of the various types of radiation on biological subjects. There is an experiment like that being carried out at Dubna in one of our labs, which required a lot of fundamental research. It took us a year to figure out a way to simulate the modified radiation background that is going to be encountered. And it's modified not only with respect to the strength of the field, but also with respect to the spectrum. And it is varied in activity depending on the section of the trajectory that we're talking about. There is a long duration experiment that we're using to study the effects of radiation on animals. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Morakov. Before going into a more in-depth discussion over countermeasures, do anyone in the audience have questions to address to the panel?
Actually, I'd like to, because I've had some experience of 6 flights and my own approach to countermeasures as an astronaut, I'd like to make my comments on this, and then as we go on to the next theme, switch to that, if that's right with Filippo. Does anybody want to jump in first? So, I've flown a number of flights, short flights to begin with, on the space shuttle, with participation in basically countermeasure experiments that involved, for example, standing up after a 10-day mission on the flight deck of the orbiter as it rolls to a stop, allowing a blood pressure measurement to take place, and at the same time making sure that your G-suit continues to press on your stomach, which has the American fluid loading protocol of about 30 fluid ounces of fluid in your stomach along with salt tablets. And the result is not advantageous to the astronaut. It results in emesis and difficulty. That was on my first 2 flights. The experiment was still important. It was looking at hypertension. But it was a participation that did not lead to my immediate health post-landing. And I didn't know as a new astronaut what I should be doing to make Michael Fall, not everybody else, but Michael Fall feel better after landing. A couple of other flights went by, and then I took part in the Mir shuttle program and was delivered to the Mir space station for 4.5 months. Because of a number of events on the Mir space station, even though I only flew on the Mir for 4.5 months, as opposed to 6 months on the International Space Station, my overall condition when I came back from spaceflight from Mir was, I think, in my judgment, worse than after the International Space Station. And I think this, in particular, again goes to what Inessa talked about. A colleague of mine who flew with me before I went to the Mir was Vladimir Titov. And he had flown in space more than a year, and he's a good, strong, clearly healthy person, and he was then too. And I was not afraid of long-duration space flight when I went to the Mir station. I knew that the people who had the most experience in it up to that date was the Russian space program. And I tried to follow all of the protocols that I could stand, and Inessa referred to one at least that I didn't do. For the duration of that flight. And the one we're talking about is this penguin costume, which tends to squeeze you together. But what happened was in that flight, I came back with less strength in my neck, and I had more bone loss in my trochanter than I did in my subsequent flight that was for longer. And this was caused, I attribute, to the lack of my full participation in all of the protocols that were prescribed in terms of using the treadmill in in the normal walking mode. But also, we did not have an exercise device of the type that is called the iRed or the ARED now on board the International Space Station. But to pick out whether it was the protocols or whether it was post-flight rehabilitation issues, I still haven't totally come to grips with. A Russian approach to post-flight, which has not been discussed here, but I think post-flight is a big, big part of keeping people healthy after their long-duration flights. The Russian approach to that is more long-term and more consistent than it is on the US side. After Mir, I was basically discharged to no concrete program of rehabilitation after 6 weeks, and I think that's pretty much the case now after ISS as well. The Russian approach is to do long walks in the mountains. It all sounds like a boondoggle to Americans, but I paid attention to those lessons, and myself, after my ISS flight, did a lot of hiking, a lot of work at altitude, on my own time and on vacation. And I felt I recovered much more quickly because I was doing this progressive activity to try and build up the strength that I had lost. One lesson on the International Space Station I learned after the Mir was my neck always hurt after Mir. It hurt for a year or more. I'd always be holding my head up when I'd be driving or something. But on the International Space Station, I paid attention to this, and we used the rubber TheraBands and did exercises in different ways. I had no issues with my neck whatsoever after ISS. So in summary, I would say I have seen as an astronaut a number of opportunities to do countermeasures. I've had to choose which ones to participate in or not. I have found my own way towards becoming back from a space flight not only strong and healthy, but also actually to prevent vestibular issues using prophylactically 25 milligrams of Phenergan on orbit before the deorbit burn. All these various aspects have meant that my last flight, which was the longest flight, probably the most difficult flight, I came back and I was in probably the best condition on landing on the Kazakhstan steppes. I'll finish there, and then we can go on to the theme of artificial gravity and the need for it.
Right, and I think this opens very well to another topic, because we look at the countermeasure as a combined, integrated system, but artificial gravity in itself is something that also calls for, it's a countermeasures, but calls also hardware to be used on board the ISS. We know space on ISS is limited. So I guess I can ask Dr. Young, what is your, I mean, you have experience with artificial gravity, with different types of gravities, with how we should use gravity in the future. What is your opinion? How would that be efficient to go forward on this?
Okay, well, you know, as I think everybody in this room knows, artificial gravity is not a new concept. In fact, Tsiolkovsky mentioned it in the early part of the 20th century. Von Nordung had a design in Germany in the 20s. It was in Collier's magazine and the von Braun articles in the 50s. But it's always been something which is dismissed as pure science fiction because it's so big, it's so expensive, nobody would really do it when you think of the large rotating devices. But the interest in artificial gravity in recent years has switched to the potential for a very different kind of AG, and that is a short radius centrifuge, small enough that you could have it even inside a spacecraft or have a short radius combination of a spacecraft and its power supply, and not one in which you necessarily lived on it, but only were exposed to it intermittently for some brief period of time. So before we get excited about artificial gravity as what's been referred to as a universal antidote, it's best to go and consider only three things that we need to know before pushing ahead with short radius centrifugation. And these are so obvious. First one, is it effective? Second one, is it tolerable? And the third one is it practical? So let me just spend a couple of minutes on the answers that I have to two of those three questions and not to the third one. Is it effective? This was the question that was lay behind a fairly large international program, IMAG program, led by Bill Pulaski, then of the Johnson Space Center, now at University of Houston, and myself, and a number of collaborators in the United States and abroad, in which we deconditioned people, not in space, but rather in the conventional 6-degree head-down bed rest, deconditioned them for a period of 21 days in bed rest, and among that population, half the population was given a daily dose of centrifugation. We were quite arbitrary. We had to pick a protocol, and we picked one in consultation with our colleagues in Japan. We picked one which seemed about right. 1 hour per day, every day, lying 6 degrees head down on the centrifuge. A G level of 1 G at the heart level, which corresponded to 2.5 Gs at the foot level. So there was about an 80% gravity gradient from head to foot. The rotation rate turned out to be close to 30 revolutions per minute, 180 degrees per second. They had their feet against the footrest so that they could do ad lib squats or standing in place. Half the subjects did that once a day. The other half merely lay on the centrifuge but were not rotated. At the end of 21 days, there was a thorough physiological assessment, and without going into the details, the news was very good. Cardiovascular deconditioning was significantly reduced for the subjects who were centrifuged. VO2 max was elevated. All of the cardiovascular parameters, including the blood pressure change during the tilt tests, vastly improved. Okay, so that was good. Similarly, on the muscle system, much reduced loss of muscle mass. Muscle biopsies showed the reduction in muscle mass loss. Muscle strength measured by the ability to do different kinds of extension tests, and stamina was helped as well. Bone was another story. We couldn't find any statistically significant difference between the control subjects and the treatment subjects, possibly because it was not effective, but most likely because 21 days was too short to really see any effects. We did test the biochemical precursor markers and were unable to find a significant effect on bone loss. Again, we did nothing in the way of impulsive loading, no vibration. Clearly there should be some room for improvement. And we did the only additional exercise we did, whatever the subjects wanted to do by standing in place. Okay? And then there were some other measures as well. Everything was positive. So the answer to the question is it effective? We think so, based upon these preliminary examinations for one arbitrary protocol. Okay, briefly, the other questions: is it tolerable? Yes, the subjects loved it. They looked forward to getting on the centrifuge each time. The human factors issues were no problem. There was no motion sickness. Is it practical? Is it practical? And I think that's something which is worthy of a serious engineering discussion. Is it practical to think about intermittent centrifugation on a centrifuge small enough that it could fit inside a spacecraft, small enough even to be put inside the International Space Station? My opinion is that that's a subject that's worth following up. So yes.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yang. And Dr. Wang, looking at the neurological adaptations of space flight, you would think that by centrifuging someone, you stimulate also the neurovestibular system, giving them the sense of gravity. Would you think that, given your experience with neurovestibular research, anti-gravity muscles, response to gravity, do you think that this would be an advantage once you come back to Earth for readaptation? Thank you.
Until now, in China, some scientific groups have studied some effect about artificial gravity. But in our center, we have not performed such kind of research because in present in China's cabin, we cannot put such high load machine inside in the cabin, and it's not practical, just like Dr. Yang have said. And we try to do some else practical things to perform it in the spaceflight and to help the astronaut to maintain its medical health. Maybe I think we must try another way to connect the effect of weightlessness. In China, there are very good concepts from Dr. Qian Xuesen Qian, maybe, he put forward kind of system concept in 1981, and we must study the challenges of weightlessness from a system concept. We must do it because in West medicine we always want to solve medical problem from cause-effect rules. We want to find what is the really parts or what really paths have do in this problem. But in China, especially from the side of the Chinese traditional medicine, we see the body as a whole system, because one stimulus may cause a lot of changes in multiple systems. We cannot solve it from a cardiovascular or just one system. We must see it as whole. So what we have done in spaceflight Shenzhou 7 is just a kind of this work. We use Western medicine to treat space motion sickness, and we also use some traditional Chinese traditional medicine concept to solve it. And we think it may be the specialty of China's space medicine. Thank you.
A little bit out of sequence now because we have some travel problems. We would like to ask Dr. Levinson and Dr. Shrimbrieva they have also some experience with how bringing together the science community and in addressing issues that are dealing with spaceflight, and they would like to let us know about it.
Thank you very much, and very good afternoon to everybody. Today I would like to introduce a new institute that is being initiated by the Russian Academy of Medical Science, the International Institute for Nano Health and Space Research. The Academy of Medical Science, together with the Khrushchev State Space Scientific Production Center, have identified the following proposed focus for this institute as a key global issue for the next century. They include, but are not limited to, for example, health-related issues covering the study of the development and production of pure nano-microtherapeutics in space, the study of the use of sound waves for the manipulation of nanoparticles in biological systems, then energy issues like the use of nanoparticles in space solar panels for energy use on Earth, novel materials development, and the study of the use of nanoparticles for the use in space transport. And finally, environmental issues like the study of the impact of environmental indices on health, the study of the human manipulation of meteorological events for the benefit of human health, the study of the use of nanomaterials in the use of nuclear waste storage, and the study of the problem and restoration of the ozone layer on Earth. This institute is also interested in identifying other key research subjects from its prospective global partners to incorporate into the investigational areas. One of the very key factors in this endeavor is the development of the next generation of researchers. This institute will also build into it a student research exchange and investigator exchange program between partner institutions and agencies. Inclusive to this, we will be looking to set up a conference for pairing investigators. We believe that by creating a coordinated institute for this endeavor, it will enable us to maximize our research capabilities and lead to a streamlined pathway for discovery. This new institute is looking to work internationally to address these key challenges to the global population and would be looking to partner with other global institutes and research facilities to build the capacities of infrastructure and expertise globally to study and resolve these issues in a collaborative fashion. Give me 1 minute less. We understand the value of the expertise in this forum, and we would like to join in the efforts for the benefit of human health, particularly with those agencies and institutes that are represented here today. Of course, as everyone here can appreciate, one of the main barriers for undertaking such research is funding. The Russian Federal Research Fund has committed to fund projects in these areas through the next 20 years via this institute. We would like to thank both Dr. Alford and Mr. Abbey for having us, and we look forward to a very productive weekend. Please excuse that I am a little addicted, but my English is not very. But I would like to skip over the word.
Thank you. In continue, let me introduce Petrovsky Center, Research Center of Surgery of Russian branch of Russian Academy of Medical Science. Within our center, we have the following department and expertise in cardiovascular surgery, general surgery, transplantation surgery, reconstructive and microsurgery, within specialization in hand and neck surgery, autotransplantation of tissue, plastic and reconstructive surgery, spinal surgery, thoracic surgery, neurological surgery, experimental surgery, telemedicine for surgical applications, research and teaching department in collaboration within Sechenov Moscow Medical Academy. Our center is looking for developing collaborative research in microsurgery, traumatology, nanotechnology in regards to tissue engineering, surgical procedures including transplantation, applications in telemedicine, students and investigation exchanges, investigation of robotic surgery and potential multi-central trial investigations. Our facilities include telemedicine suite, MRI and CT facilities, theoretical computer modeling 3D, biomedical chamber facilities, cardiovascular stent labs, experimental surgery research lab facilities, optics microscopes for microsurgical procedures, trial and investigation facilities for surgical procedures, for transplantation, for translation to clinical use, laser surgery and endoscopic surgery facilities. In conclusion, we understand the importance of the long-duration analog studies of Earth and long-duration space flight to the Moon and Mars. We feel that due to the international makeup of those potential growth, there is an importance of creating standardized surgical procedures inclusive to each application in the telemedicine. Inclusive to this is the utilization of the International Space Station for research and development of novel nanomicromaterials for tissue engineering and its translation to beneath of Earth. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Shimbareva, for your presentation. And we can continue now further on with our team into the countermeasures, and we head up towards the application. And I think this will be an important topic. What do we prioritize for future? We're going to Moon, Mars, and I think, Dr. Sutton, you have, of course, the experience and the insight, and we need to have, and we heard it today, we need to have countermeasures that are integrated. We heard it. They need to be multidisciplinary. We need hardware that works, hardware that doesn't break in flight, but however that is innovative. And everything that's innovative is a test. So what do we need to do to find this proper mix in our new approach to countermeasures to Moon, Mars?
Thank you. Good afternoon. You're absolutely right. It's a very good question and a challenging problem when addressing multidisciplinary and integrated research. And I think that one of the key words really comes up in terms of priorities. Certainly there's some wonderful opportunities that exist and more that can be created. Folks have talked about priorities in specific areas related to bone, to circadian problems, to medical problems. But what I'd like to do is perhaps make a few suggestions as to how to proceed in going forward. And some of this echoes some of the thoughts that have already been presented. First and foremost, I think that there's a significant body of knowledge, particularly among the end users. And I think it's absolutely essential that as we go forward and look at our scientific priorities, that we integrate the users in this approach. I think there's been historically a tendency to have users come in after the scientific community has put forward ideas and actually gone ahead and prioritized. I know within our own institute, the NSBRI, we have had an excellent experience with a formal user panel that's chaired by Dr. Leroy Chow and also assisted by Dr. John Clark, of engaging current and former astronauts and flight surgeons in the process of helping to advise us on the priority research and to work together with the scientific community. And I think that there's, we're hearing as a sub-theme throughout this symposium an interface between the users and the scientific community. I think this will be absolutely essential in going forward and prioritizing what should be done. I think the second suggestion really picks up on what Dr. Kozlovskaya was talking about. I think this really does need to be, at this time, an international effort. I'm sorry, it's not coming from me. I don't have a BlackBerry on here. But I think that I think a subtle distinction should be made between selecting science and prioritizing it. I think Dr. Markov, you're absolutely right that that things are complicated, that different countries have different systems, that issues of money and other aspects come in. But fundamentally, taking a step back, I think having a formal mechanism by which different nations can have a table that they sit around and that discussions can take place on what relative priorities are, what needs to be done now, what needs to be done but maybe not now, what are the best ways to use the resources that exist upon station, what is the vision that we share together as a scientific and user community involving the physicians and engineers and so forth. I think the third suggestion relates to the fact that there's some urgency to this. The station is moving into full utilization mode, and it takes time to put together integrated experiments, multidisciplinary experiments. It takes time to train the team and to work out some of the kinks. And the lead times are long, and I think that we need to move now and not wait. I think that the brain trust exists within this room and with our colleagues to move forward. And I think the last point that I'd like to make actually picks up on something that Dr. Kerwin mentioned this morning, and that is there's nothing like a dedicated mission, either in whole or part, that focuses on a grand problem. If that problem be countermeasures, then that would be wonderful. And clearly there's great examples. There are great examples in Skylab, in Neurolab, in other missions that have flown. And there's nothing that really holds us back as a community from planning a dedicated mission that really allows us to address this very interesting question that you raised. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sutton. And we have seen involvement of engineering with medical to help the medical people and the scientists to help out in finding a way to protect the health of our astronauts flying in space longer and longer missions. However, what we do on ground is always based on research that is applying to models. We have hardware that needs then now to be used in flight. And how do we, to Dr. Grounds, how do we go this step? Because it is easy to plan for an experiment on the ground, as we heard before, but then when it goes to station and we need to use the hardware on station, how can we do that next step? How can we prepare for that? And now we're talking about station, but then we'll be talking about moon and then on Mars.
Thank you for that question. First of all, I guess we should remind ourselves of what we have with the International Space Station. What we have on board is a fairly robust set of biomedical hardware that can measure physiological signals. It can measure metabolic rates. It can measure changes in crew weight. There's all the basic hardware is there to do that. We have international sharing agreements, particularly with our European partners, to share equipment within the laboratories, and it works out particularly well with the mixes of their concentration on biomedical on biological experiments, and the U.S. concentration on physiological and human experiments. So all of that is in place. We have cooperation, of course, with our Russian partners with respect to how we look at pre and post flight testing. But I will have to say that I first have to echo what was said by Nessa and Dr. Morakov about the value of coming up with standard testing, particularly pre and post flight and countermeasures in flight. As a scientist, I know you all can appreciate how much that improves the power of these of the studies and the knowledge that you gain from the normal adaptation for spaceflight measures. So that is a goal that we have been seeking as well, and we also recognize, and I agree with Dr. Morakov about the difficulty of doing that. But we do have steps in place with respect to the International Countermeasure Working Group, where we will meet, I guess, in 3 weeks as a venue to continue that conversation and to try to get closer fast. What will we not have on International Space Station? Well, after the end of the shuttle program, we will not have as robust a logistics system. The shuttle provides a lot of down mass that we will no longer have in place. That will undoubtedly factor into how we design experiments, and particularly with the return of biological samples, which often have to be refrigerated or frozen. The other thing we do not have, and Dr. Sutton brought this up, is a lot of time. We do not have a lot of time left, even on the International Space Station, and I say that by virtue of the lead times required for the preparation of experiments. I, in fact, have looked at plans. I look at plans on a frequent basis that pretty much looks at the end of days for a space station. It says, if you're going to fly these experiments and get this result, here's about as much as you can accomplish. So there is a sense of urgency in terms of trying to get the maximum out of space station. But what do we plan to do with this magnificent machine? The U.S., as you may well be familiar, is concentrating on the issues and problems associated with exploration. They've concentrated and focused on those questions, and we've designed our human experiments to address those questions. Likewise, that brings the need to come close to the operational side of operational medicine. We know that the countermeasures involving exercise hardware are key to understanding currently the space normal or space normal with respect to having been treated with these countermeasures. And so therefore it's very important to do the experiments that involve the use of the ARED, a well-instrumented strength machine for both on-orbit resistive exercise, and the new treadmill, which provides a lot better instrumentation for us. So that's a particular opportunity. Pre and post flight, we need to make the maximum use of the measures on returning crews, and in particular, in order to know what works with countermeasures. We're looking at making sure that those measures, add some measures with respect to muscle mass, things that we can do on returning crews that will help us. And also use the post-flight time frame to look at the changes that will measure how crews react to the change when they re-enter gravitational fields, either as pilots of spacecraft or entering into a gravitational field on a planetary surface, the moon or Mars, to do work. We need to have some very strong predictive powers about how capable people will be and how soon we can expect them to perform. So what are we doing with respect to systems like bone? Well, clearly there are things we want to understand with respect to how trabecular bone changes and how reversible that is over time. We've heard that people can retain most of their bone density, or actually the density changes with respect to return, but they can regain it over time. It may not be the same necessary for the microstructure of the bone, and it may be an important feature to know how reversible that is and how that carries on into risk later in life. With respect to muscle, it is going to be important to understand how to retain enough muscle strength that crews can perform their missions, and the effect of nutritional countermeasures on muscle strength. While I don't see an overt problem necessarily with the cardiovascular system, there are mechanisms with respect to changes in the heart that we do want to understand, the mechanisms of changes in heart size. In the sensory motor system, I've already discussed or mentioned the fact that we're concerned about what happens when you re-enter gravitational fields, and we want to know the mechanisms and the actual performance of people when they re-enter. Immunology, we're mostly concerned about how to monitor the status of the immune system. That's something that's not currently done in orbit. It's something that we would need to have for interplanetary missions. So the current work in immunology will help us understand how to go about monitoring. We've talked about what's been talked about in here are the problems on behavioral health or issues that we need to address. Our thrust in behavioral health is to provide the crew with self-assessment tools and tools to support them, and self-help if they find they need it. We think that's going to be key for these very long duration missions, and we'll use the International Space Station to validate and test those tools. Medical technology, you go on these planetary missions in confined spaces, and with small amounts of logistics, there's a need to improve and augment terrestrial medical technology with pieces that don't currently exist. The ability to concentrate oxygen out of the atmosphere for ventilation, the ability to generate infusion fluids from potable water, among two examples of something that is needed, because when you cut off the logistics train, you're in a much different situation. Most of our radiation work is done on the ground with ground simulators such as the NASA Space Radiation Lab that can simulate both GCR and protons. We think that's the place to do most of that work. But there is a place in orbit for the testing of dosimetry, particularly the kinds of dosimetry that we'll be using to monitor lunar missions. And finally, there are additional features with respect to nutrition, such as the dosing for vitamin D that need to be measured and understood well before we embark on these missions, in which we get further away from Earth, more remote, less likely to, or less apt to be able to react to problems. So those are the issues that we're tackling with International Space Station, and we think that it's a valuable asset for us.
Thank you, Dr. Grounds. And this really sets, again, the stage for the next topic, which is we as flight surgeons are always missing and the full suite of medical hardware and support in space. And of course, we are trained on ground to do certain things in our medical school years, and then we go to support missions, and certain things are not available to us. And this becomes more and more of a concern as we go to Mars, or first to Moon and then to Mars. And Dr. Buchowski, what is your experience in this, in ultrasound, in techniques from remote, and also into, we heard this morning, into robotics? What is your view? How can we narrow this gap?
Well, I'm not a flight surgeon. I'm just a surgeon, and I'm from
not just.
I'm from Detroit, so I'm used to making do. And for those of you who voted for the auto bailout, I thank you for that from my state and certainly my city. My challenge in working with the space program was to take the things that we do in our tertiary care facility and modify them for use in a different environment. And oh, by the way, that generally won't be done by a doctor. There might be some communication challenge, and then there might be something, a new word that I learned was off-nominal events that are unanticipated that we get in the hospital as well. So let me give you an example, and there's two ways of doing this. And what I was really energized in being at this symposium was in listening to our international partners, who are sometimes more pragmatic at taking care of things than we are, at least at my institution. So let's try and take care of a crew member who develops right lower quadrant pain halfway to Mars or maybe on the lunar surface. And I'm worried that that individual might have appendicitis. Now, we could do a few things. We could take out their appendix before they went. That's been talked about. That has its own set of issues. How do we diagnose that? If you are in my hospital, you will probably get a CAT scan. That is a multi-million-dollar piece of hardware. It is very heavy. It is very power intensive. Oh, by the way, it has its own radiation hit as well. You'll be seen by me with 10 or 15 years of training in this area. I hopefully will make the appropriate diagnosis. You will have your appendix removed, most probably through a tiny scope, maybe even using a robot. Now, do we want to build all of that capability for something that will occur hopefully once in a blue moon? An alternative way, and one that I would submit to you would be just as effective and that we could theoretically do tomorrow on orbit, would be to take one of these very able astronaut crew members, and I must say I was very surprised and impressed by my colleague here, my colleague in the back row, because I thought these dumb astronauts would never be able to do what I can do in that. And we trained them in a very short amount of time on how to do an ultrasound. It takes me 500 hours to learn how to do that. You graciously gave me 2 hours to work with these folks. And I tell you, they got through the eye of the needle damn well in that. Diagnostic quality images. In fact, when Leroy had his recent twins, he was looking at the ultrasound and was able to diagnose what was going on in that from this tiny amount of training. So I'm sure that Mike, even not having an ultrasound probe in hand, with about 20 minutes of training, he could probably get me an image to decide whether or not you had appendicitis or not. Well, now we got a problem. Now what do you do with that? And rather than having the robot and a fancy laparoscope and all that, we could again use what you have on orbit today, that ultrasound machine, take a tiny needle, stick it in this area, leave it in there as a drain, as we have done in many other circumstances, and that'll get you through the eye of the needle, through your entire flight, and then when you come home, we can take care of business in a more appropriate way. That's one way of doing things. My Russian colleagues use the bracelet device as a countermeasure during early flight. We've looked at that in cooperation with them, and Dr. Bogomolov and Anessa have recently collaborated with us looking at the cardiac effects of that, again using ultrasound. And you know what? If you had a significant cardiac event or had pulmonary edema on orbit, this device would probably take care of business for you. So I don't know as if we need to fly a big fancy trauma surgeon like me with a wonderful hospital that I work in. I think we're almost there for that. I think what we have done well to date is define the potential risks that will occur and the frequency that we may see them. I think we've done a reasonable job with countermeasures to try and reduce those and selection in that. I think what we haven't done real well so far is to work together cooperatively using Chinese traditional medicine. What an interesting thing. I hadn't thought of that before. Using some of the long techniques on the Russian side of things and not being quite so siloed for these common human problems, not common space agency problems. And I think we haven't also done real well of taking some of the space medical research that we've done and folding it back into actual procedures that the folks on console, if faced with this difficult problem, could deal with. And I want to finish with not underestimating the human component of this. I had the honor of talking to Walt Cunningham yesterday, and he was relating a device that they tried in the early space program related to a map graphic, and he asked a poignant question, what do I do if this thing doesn't work in that? And so they said, well, you go back to plan A, which is you. And so he said, why even have this device on there? And so every time we have a new technological solution with it, it brings its own set of challenges. So I am very optimistic about the ability of a well-trained non-physician crew member to do most of the things that I do in my hospital. Maybe not exactly the same way, but good enough to keep a crew member healthy.
Well, we hope so. That this will be the
yes.
The approach.
I want to jump in here. I got some praise from Scott here. So the only reason why it went so well was because we had only a 2-second light delay in our communications, and an image. And so communications is what enables that sort of interaction between the teleoperator and the robot or human operator.
Yeah. You know what, though? We built a scenario for an appendectomy with a 15-minute delay in there, and it extends the timeline, obviously, but it was very doable. We worked with Christian Otto up in Devon Island, and it worked famously.
This morning we have also touched the issue that at this moment in time, as we grow into more complex activities, maybe our governments and our agencies around the world Thank you. We have seen this morning that there has been an effort to bring together, or at least has been communicated to all, the effort to bring together. There needs to be an effort to bring together the research agencies and governments. Most likely, in order to go further, we need a more synergy among these three bodies. Of course, also the private sector will eventually join in, but as we know, experience tells that when you want to start a system, you need to have intelligentsia bring in the ideas. You have to have governments bring in the support, and of course the agency are merging this together. I think there is an experience that is being done so far. It's in its infancy, but with the National Institute of Health and NASA, and that may be an example that also other governments can and agencies can look into. And I would like Dr. Wang to speak to it on our experience on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Bobby and George, for the invitation. When I sit here, I sort of feel actually, I shouldn't say when I sit here. When I look at the agenda, I was thinking, why was I there? Countermeasure, Well, I'm from National Institute of Health. We care about human health on Earth, and we are the prominent federal agency to support biomedical research to improve human health, to save lives through biomedical research. So for those of you who do not know us, we are based in Bethesda, Maryland. And NIH actually has had, I think, a long history collaborating with NASA and other federal agencies. And what we have done in the past, I think, it's interesting listening to the integration that everybody is so concerned. And here we're talking about integrating federal agencies within the same country. So there are issues, but we actually have overcome a lot of obstacles. And the way I think we can contribute to this countermeasure is you think what you are trying to do is from the observation, you try to anticipate exercise, nutrition, and different procedures to counter it. But if you don't have what we learned from Earth, in other words, let's call these exercise or food, let's call them treatment. If you didn't have these treatment, how would you counteract these things? So Earth research is very important. We recently issued a funding opportunity announcement that NIH is going to work with NASA, and we're going to send cellular, molecular-based research into space with NASA's help. And I have often been asked, why molecular, cellular, why not human? The reason is, as Dan is sitting here, NASA has a human research program already. We would like to be complementary, and I'm sure what we learned from the achievement in the human research program will benefit our scientists, and we have Maribeth and Julie in the audience, and we work very closely with them, and with a lot of help with them from them as well. So our purpose is really try to bring the experiments, use the unique ISS resource to do experiment. Hopefully what we learned there will benefit, we can bring it back, benefit human health on Earth. Can you imagine if years later, some of the NIH experiments done on ISS has a huge human health impact? And that's a very positive feedback loop for ISS for its existence. Someone was asking why ISS, what's the uniqueness of it? And for us, it's a discovery platform as a new. I remember the first conversation I had with Neil Palace, I asked the same question. I think for us, scientific discovery is interesting. We don't know what we will find out, but hopefully whatever we find out will be able to help not only human health on Earth, but also astronauts' health in space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wang. I really have to congratulate this panel. They were perfect in timing. We started late, but we ended up right on time. And do we have time for questions, I hope, to the audience? Do we have time, Dr. Alford? Yeah, okay. So I'll open the floor to questions. And Jeff?
I noticed Larry made a number of comments about the AG project and positive results for cardiovascular and muscular systems, but one of the real challenges we've had after the transition from 0G to 1G has been in the neurovestibular area, and I know Dr. Kozlowska has taken a special interest in this particular topic as well, and please tell us how can the short arm centrifuge result help us with that kind of problem. If we transition from zero gravity to, say, Martian gravity, can we also use it to improve our ability to transition back to 1 gravity on the return trip? And Dr. Kozlowski, I want to comment.
Okay. Jeff, there are really 2 parts to it. The first is not how can it help us, but how can we be sure that it doesn't hurt us? Because the major thing one would worry about in going onto a centrifuge and off it at regular bases is a negative after effect, where you would get off the centrifuge de-adapted to 0G. So we worry a lot about losing the in-flight adaptation. That does not appear to be the case from any of our measurements of postural stability or post-rotatory nystagmus following centrifugation. The other part of the question is, the more challenging one is, will centrifugation, by providing a periodic stimulus to the otolith organs, keep the brain adapted to the 1G environment? Our friend Bernie Cohen from Mount Sinai and Stephen Moore think that it does. They, based upon limited data from the Neurolab mission, and a number of others, including myself, feel that it's entirely too preliminary. The AG position that we're using, Jeff, is as you well recall, is a subject is lying with his or her head very close to the center of rotation, of the order of 20 to 50 centimeters away from the center of rotation, so that the vertical component, the longitudinal component of centrifugal force at the vestibular system is quite small. And I personally don't think that it's enough to overcome the loss of adaptation that you get in weightlessness. So it's a long-winded answer of saying I don't think we can suggest that artificial gravity will serve to avoid the post-flight postural instability that we've seen.
May I? Yeah, just. Jeff, I think that the question which you put is extremely important, and it is not just concern not just artificial gravity or centrifuge, but actually it concerns the very important question which we never discussed. We discussed it only yesterday with Jacob Bloomberg, because he put the question and I answered. When we talk about the countermeasure for long-term flights and evaluation of the results of this countermeasure, we usually judge the results on the basis of how to say, the speed of cosmonaut returning to the sufficient state. But we never talked, and even here today, nobody talked about the the state of cosmonaut at that moment when he just came, what you touched now, right? Actually, when the cosmonaut just came, just landed, especially ballistically landed, whatever exercise did you use during they are still not good. Still not good. And I remember that I told Jacob yesterday that I remember during our conference on long-term flights, we had such systematic conferences at the Institute. And I had to report about countermeasures there. But the other people who met people at the landing site, they just talked about their stay there. And the chief of this team always started with very acid note toward me. He would say, Inasa is talking here about good, sufficient exercise system, which cosmonaut used or not. I will tell you, from my point of view, the person who meet them, no one is good. But they're met on the ground by team of people who takes care about them. So that's why I want to remind what Boris just told, that when we talk about Mars and even Moon, when people would come there, they will be not met by people who will take care about them, and they have to be in state when they can support themselves and return to normal life themselves. And from this point of view, I think we have to work much more because we even don't know what the reason why they're so bad when they come. Next day they're okay. 2 days later, that's fine. But when they come, I'm not open any secret. I don't open names. But I will tell you that many of our cosmonauts who were searched in Taiga by 2, 3, 4 hours, our people, our team of safers, they found them laying flat. Yeah, and I think that artificial gravity could help. From my point of view, why? Because I think that they're very bad shape after flight at the very first hours. Because first of all, because of orthostatic intolerance, that the intolerance, and because of sensory disturbances which they have, because all sensory system should come back to their normal interaction, which also takes time. But artificial gravity from this point of view could be of help.
And the other thing that we also are concerned about, because we're building a new vehicle and we're planning on landing it in the water, and it's going to be after long duration flight, and if we ever have a problem where we can't get to that crew and they need to get out in a very quick manner, that could be very challenging for them if they're nervous stability challenged. And you agree, Rick?
Yeah, exactly. I was going to ask along the same lines, what can we do on ISIS?
Not only vestibular, but orthostatic as well.
Right, we know what challenges the crews faced from both Apollo and Skylab and with water landings. What can we do with the ISS right now in developing countermeasures for water landings? I mean, that'll be 2015. We've got 5 years and change to come up with those countermeasures to support those crews. I mean, under nominal landing, the crews will be basically just fat, dumb, and happy waiting for the recovery ship to get them and hoist them out. But in an off-nominal recovery, they're basically going to be expected to pop that top hatch, get into a raft, and potentially could be in the water for 24 hours. So what can we do, if anything, with countermeasures to support those crews? Mike?
They won't be happy, and I don't think they'll be very fat. I will take twice the amount of Farragut.
May I ask you a question? May I ask you a question? Did you try to perform just questionnaire of all cosmonauts, all astronauts who already flew and came back? Ask them just subjectively, who of them, if he is honest, who of them had the ability when he landed to get out of just by himself, to get out of the ship and maintain himself and so on. Did you try to make such questionnaire?
And that's a great question. And actually, we did on an individual basis, but actually with Dr. Kerwin sitting here, he has firsthand experience. Maybe you could explain your experience, sir.
As to our capabilities after recovery on Skylab, I agree that after durations, certainly as long as 84 days, you're not physically equipped to handle a contingency. Trying to climb out of the tunnel hatch would defeat us, I think. As to the in-flight situation, after experiencing the inability to create motion sickness on the rotating chair, I believe that cross-adaptation between rotation and inertial stability will not be a problem. And I'd love to try it.
And we have time only for one last question, and Ulrich, please.
Yeah, this question, my name is Ulrich Straub. I'm working for the European Space Agency as a flight surgeon. And my question goes to you, Dr. Grounds. We heard today a lot about radiation and radiation protection, that it would be one of the key issues also for exploration. And of course, I definitely agree to that. Overseeing 5 missions as a flight surgeon is always an issue. But I would not share at least the assumption that you probably made, if I understood you correct, namely that most of this would be dealt appropriately on the ground, on the one side, and the other part of the house would be that we have got an issue with dosimetry, personal dosimetry. There I would definitely agree. However, I think that the future, if we want or not, will and has to be that we match the pretty precise physics of radiation protection and radiation measurement, namely dosimetry, in particular physical dosimetry, with a biological meaning. If I have got my astronaut and he asked me, doctor, what does that mean that I've got so much on my badge? That's the one thing. And anyway, I cannot avoid it. And anyway, I understand I want to fly. So I don't want to be not accepted because I've got a certain radiation measurement there. That's the one part of the story. The other part of the story is that fortunately medical development is going on, research is going on. We have got capabilities in biodosimetry, although they are not standardized yet, and we have to do that. That's an important point. We are talking about strand breaks, we are talking about impact, we are talking about cancer, and of course that all gets together in a pretty violent soup sometimes. And of course the astronaut asks us, doctor, what does that mean to me? I've got physical dosimetry, I've got biodosimetry, so is my prostate cancer from radiation I received in space? Can I distinguish that? What is with my life insurance? So if we wish or not, and also if we wish or not concerning genetics and genetic examinations, these are issues we will have to face. That is, to my mind, for sure, and we are not at the moment capable, at least to my understanding, to fully mimic the scope of radiation on the Earth. So we definitely need an experience, and we should take advantage, we should really take advantage of a unique population, namely the astronauts, who are exposed in a fashion which you will not find on Earth, never. So that is something, because also today there were some issues, what can ISS really bring to us, or still can bring to us, or spaceflight? These are things like microgravity, which we cannot mimic on Earth, and we should take advantage of that. That's point number one. And then very last, very brief remark. which I want to make is sometimes I got the feeling also coming out of the MMOP that of course there's a concentration and that should and shall be to new frontiers, namely going back to Moon, going to Mars, I'm sorry. Of course we need that and we are happy about it, but over that we should not forget that the ISS is barely still completely assembled, so we should also take advantage of that. And even if it is a short time, first of all, we don't know how short is, and second, we have it now there, and we have got experience with it, and we are trying to introduce new partners, I would think. So don't waste what you already have. Keep it in mind and prepare with that for the future.
I think we're actually closer in philosophy than you realize. The beauty of having a facility like Brookhaven in SRL is that it can generate GCR, and low Earth orbit is a different environment than the lunar orbit. I mean, than lunar base with respect to the composition, with respect to protons and galactic cosmic rays. The uncertainties in health and the long-term cancer risks that you speak of, in particular, among the other risks, there are risks in the acute systems as well. But those uncertainties really come from GCR. And we can study GCR in the NSRL at Brookhaven with actually a fairly high degree of similarity, and certainly in segmented parts of the spectrum, to understand the biological effectiveness in various tissues, in animal models and in human cellular models. It is a very effective and, in fact, fast way to. It's not fast, but it is a much more efficient way to study that problem than space. Now, I will grant you the one thing is that the use of biodosimetry. The use of biodosimetry, even in its sense, that is not well known how we would use that data, and that is something that we could get a lot better at. And using space station for biodosimetry does make a lot of sense. So there's a point of agreement there.
Thank you again to all the panelists, and I'll let the second panel go on.
Yes, if you have any additional questions, maybe you can catch the panelists outside and talk with them. But I think we're going to have to move on to the next panel. Thank you all.